Number 10. The Cowden family. 7.5 months after the Cowden family was reported missing in 1974, the police found their bodies. The Cowdens had gone camping in the Siskiyou Mountains in Applegate, Oregon over Labor Day weekend in 1974, but failed to show up for dinner at Richard Cohen's mother's house on September 1st. Media accounts from the time described their campsite as undisturbed, as if the family left abruptly. Investigators later postulated that they had been abducted. Then their bodies were found in April 1975, about 100 feet away from the campsite. Richard's body was found tied to a tree, while the other bodies of his wife, son, and daughter were found in a cave with rocks sealing the entrance. Dwayne Lee Little, a criminal serving 2 life sentences, allegedly confessed to a fellow inmate that he ended the lives of the Cowdens family while on parole, but there was no conviction and the case remains open. Number 9. Dennis Martin. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. They headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Dennis and his brothers had played a prank and they were going to hide separately in a bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare the dads. They did this prank, but then they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out the search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history, and one of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing persons. Dwight was a seasoned tracker, and he was struck by the complete lack of any sort of tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Number 8. Bessie and Glenn Hyde. In 1928, Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were traveling down the Colorado River in a boat in October and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was new at it. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance who said they got a feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. It was said if they completed the trip successfully, they could go on a paid lecture tour. So this trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. Now there are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try a too difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent, or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports about what happened to the Hydes, and there has been more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. Number 7. Paul Fugate. On January 13, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who had last been seen heading out to do a trail check around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke to him or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him, and they assumed that he had been a victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued, no trace was found, and suspicions began to rise. One park volunteer came forward to say that he seen Paul in a truck with 2 strange men, leading some to wonder if he had been kidnapped. Or some proposed he may have simply ditched his old life. Whatever the truth, no trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. To make things more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wild lands. The search and rescue team found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger. Number 6. Catherine Van Elst. Devil's Den is a state park situated in Arkansas, but it's larger than the Ozark National Park that surrounds it. In the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Van Elst went missing while camping at the park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. Now the catch, she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She'd also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her, and she wasn't even scared. No one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. So what truly happened, it seems like we'll never know. Number 5. Polly Melton. Polly Melton was not someone you would expect to be an avid hiker. Although out of shape and a heavy smoker, she still loved the mountains, hiked regularly, and made the base of Smoky Mountains in North Carolina her summertime home. She was well known in the mountain town community, even volunteering almost daily at senior homes in town. Now one day Polly went on a trail marked Easy in September of 1981. According to the two women she was hiking with, she sped up ahead them. It wasn't a far distance, but she went over a knoll out of sight. When the two women she had been walking with only moments prior got over the hill, Polly had completely vanished. They heard no strange noises indicating distress and saw no sign of a struggle. They continued to the campsite and still no Polly. Now Polly didn't have any belongings with her, not even a change of clothes or her purse. Now she was also on medications for high blood pressure and nausea, and she didn't have these with her either. There was no trace of her until a little over a year later when a check in her name was cashed in Alabama. Now police failed to say without a doubt that it was her signature, and there's a popular theory that she decided to run off that day. Did she secretly meet with someone in the woods? I guess we'll never know. Number 4. Nahanni Valley Deaths. Over the decades, many unfortunate travelers and explorers have gone missing, or they turned up dead and beheaded in this valley. The number of decapitated bodies found within Nahanni Valley have earned it the nickname Valley of the Headless Men. In 1917, Martin Jorgensen's body was discovered decapitated next to the remains of his cabin as it was burned to the ground. It's supposed that he struck gold in the vicinity as he wrote of it back home before ending up beheaded. Then in 1931, another body was found. This time it was of Phil Powers. His charred remains were discovered in the ashes of what was his cabin. The RCMP was quick to attribute his death to a faulty stovepipe, but their explanation was repeatedly debunked by various sources. Many others simply disappeared without a trace in the remote wilderness of the valley, and in 1928, one prospector named Angus Hall ventured ahead of his party and was never seen again. Another pair of men, Joe Milholland and Bill Epier, disappeared in 1936. For many years they were searched for but never found. The only thing discovered was their cabin, burned down to the ground. So why do so many people go missing in this specific area, and why are their cabins being burnt down? I need answers. Number 3. Larry Jeffrey. Larry Jeffrey disappeared near the peak of 12,000-foot Mount Charleston in Humboldt-Toibi National Forest. The search began immediately after the boy wandered away from his brothers, and within days the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. In a TV interview, David Paldies told reporter George Knapp that there were no predators afoot that day, and since the area they were in was pretty secluded, it's easy to rule out an abduction by car. This boy just walked into oblivion, David said. Now when Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing, and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures at night. Searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and they discovered evidence that the boy had been eating insects and foraged berries along the way. Overall, around 1,000 people searched for 16 days, but they never found him. Number 2. Douglas Legg. Douglas Legg and some of his family were heading out for a hike at the Adirondack Forest Preserve, Sanatoni Preserve, when his uncle spotted poison ivy and told him to put on long pants to protect himself. Now the family's cabin was a short, straight shot from where they were, but Douglas was never seen again. Now he was very familiar with these woods as his family owned the cabin where they were staying and described him as a mini woodsman. Douglas's disappearance sparked one of the southern Adirondack's largest search and rescue missions, with more than 600 people searching the woods, but he left no trail. Rescuers used dogs in their search, and the dogs followed his scent over a 30-mile trail through difficult terrain. Now there's no way he could have traveled alone for such a distance. Some researchers reported seeing bear-like tracks near the site, and while black bears do drag their prey to cover, dragging someone 30 miles over difficult terrain seems unusual. The family became desperate and began suspecting each other and even their friends of abducting Douglas, but the police were certain he had simply gotten lost. Now, he was never seen again, and he still has not been found. And coming in at number 1 is David Gonzalez. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car. 40 minutes passed, and his mother realized that David never returned and that the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. Then he was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strangest disappearances in national parks. A week later, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. This area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead without any reason or clue as to why. Now this is already baffling, especially considering the power of forensics and the skill of investigators, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to have handled the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that to be his fate. No one nearby heard David scream either, and David's parents have gone on record to say that they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar. They believe that he was kidnapped and that he still may be alive somewhere and that body wasn't his. Now this is sounding exactly like Stranger Things, and it's creepy. The family still thinks that he's out there, but law enforcement thinks this case is closed.
Starting us off at number 10, we have Kenny Veach. So several years ago, Kenny Veach was a YouTuber and an urban explorer who enjoyed documenting his adventures and sharing with his followers. Usually he would hike and explore caves or ruins, but sadly one expedition in 2014 was his last. Before his disappearance, he had posted to his channel about a strange cave that he had come across in the desert, explaining that when he approached it, he got a strange, vibrating sensation all over his body and was filled with a bad feeling about what was inside. So he didn't explore any further. But after his followers begged him to go back and try again, Kenny obliged. On November 10th, 2014, Kenny told his family he was on a trip into the mountains of Nevada, but when Kenny didn't return, loved ones began to worry. However, since the desert is so big and filled with caves, it was hard to figure out what cave Kenny had gone in to explore. Sadly, he was never found, and the truth surrounding his disappearance remains a mystery to this day. Moving on to number 9, Everett Roos. Born in 1914, a writer and an artist turned explorer, Roos entered into the explorer game when he was just 16 and spent the next 4 years drifting through the most remote parts of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah, selling off paintings to pay for his way. He explored the Colorado Plateau, the High Sierra, Yosemite, and Sequoia National Park, and remained in communication by letter, if not a little infrequently, with his parents. That was until 1934. Having told his parents he would not be reachable for the next 2 months, Everett set out on what would turn out to be his last journey. Last seen alone and heading into the Utah desert with 2 donkeys as pack animals, after 4 months passed, his parents began to worry that they may never see their son again, and tragically, they didn't. Now, while we can assume he has died at this point because he would be 109 if he was still alive, nobody has ever been able to track down his remains, and so the mystery of where he disappeared to remains as big now as it did in 1934. Next up at number 8, Naomi Umura. Prior to their mysterious disappearance, Naomi completed many amazing feats during his lifetime, including climbing the highest mountain on each of the world's continents solo, trekking across the Arctic to become the first person to reach the North Pole solo, rafting down the Amazon, and being a part of the first Japanese team to scale Mount Everest. But strangely, in 1984, while exploring Mount McKinley in Alaska, he vanished and was never seen again. His goal was to become the person to achieve a solo winter climb up the treacherous peak. And while there is reason to believe that Naomi reached the peak, he never made it off the mountain. At least that we know of. Following the incident, rescue parties searched for the explorer, but all that was ever found was some equipment and his diary. Neither him or any remains to prove his death have ever been recovered. Moving on to number 7, Daniel Lynn Lagerlof. Once upon a time, Daniel Lynn Lagerlof was one of the most acclaimed directors and writers in Sweden. But his rise to stardom all came to a crashing halt in 2011 when Daniel was out scouting locations for a new thriller project and disappeared forever. Last anyone knew, Daniel had gone to the beautiful nature reserve of Chirpanan, a remote island, all by himself. Now, why he went all by himself, no one really knows, but according to his friends, he was simply going off to explore the island and planned to return. But tragically, he never did. To this day, his whereabouts are still a mystery, as no remains have ever been found and no one can safely confirm what actually happened to him. There's one theory that he slipped and fell into the water, but again, as investigations have never been able to recover a body or any sign of his remains, we can't see for sure what happened to Daniel. Moving on to number 6. Peng Jiamu. Potentially one of the better known modern explorers due to the unfortunate circumstances surrounding his last exploration. Peng Jiamu was a Chinese biologist that was well known for his dangerous expeditions. He began his travels in the late 1950s, participating in multiple scientific expeditions. But it was the 1980 expedition where he led a team of biologists, geologists, and archaeologists that will remain a giant mystery. Everything seemed normal the first few days, but several days into the journey, he left a note saying he was going to find water. But strangely, he never returned. The Chinese government launched a massive search of the desert, but no sign of Peng was ever found. According to those familiar with the dangers of the area, the famed biologist was most likely buried alive by a freak sandstorm or crushed by an avalanche of loose soil. But while as many as 6 skeletons have been recovered from nearby areas since his disappearance, none have been proven to be Peng. Moving on to number 5, Park Young-suk. Once a legendary South Korean climber, Young-suk had set records across the globe, his achievements including becoming the first person to complete the Adventures Grand Slam by climbing the 14 highest Himalayas, the highest mountain on each continent, and reaching the North and South Poles. Plus, he also pioneered the new line on the southern face of Everest in 2009, which is to say, he knew what the hell he was doing. However, that is why it was all the more mysterious when he disappeared. In 2011, while he and 2 companions were trying a new route on Annapurna, he radioed over to his base camp on October 18th, stating his intention to return to base camp following a gale and rock slide. But that would be the last anyone heard from him, as he never arrived at the camp, nor did any of his team. To this day, no trace of his or his team's remains have ever been found. Moving on to number 4, Mystery Man. Now, I'm sure you have heard about this story before, and while some say it's an urban legend, the truth is no one actually knows if it's real or not. That being said, back in the 1990s, a group of people exploring the Paris catacombs came across an abandoned camcorder and decided to have a look and see what could be on it. But what they found was beyond disturbing. The video was of an unidentified male explorer wandering around the catacombs, but then suddenly he becomes spooked by something that we cannot see and begins to speed up through the dark tunnels trying to escape whatever it is. As the footage continues, his breathing gets more and more labored, and he runs faster and faster until finally he drops the camera into a puddle with a splash and runs off into the distance. Who was this urban explorer? Where did he go? Is he still trapped inside the catacombs? Is this videotape even real? These are all questions that no one seems to be able to answer. Moving on to number 3. Percy Fawcett. By 1925, Percy Fawcett had already made quite a name for himself in the world of explorers, but he still had one place left to explore on his bucket list. The only problem was it was risky. You see, he had this theory about a lost and abandoned city named Z, which he believed existed somewhere in the Mato Grosso region of Brazil. So in 1925, Percy, his eldest son Jack, and a friend named Rayleigh Rimmel set off to explore the fabled lost city. But strangely, not long after their announcement of their newest adventure, the group vanished without a trace and were never seen again. Some theories suggest that on their way to the lost city, they were killed by a hostile tribe. Others speculate that they could have been attacked by a pack of wild jaguars. Most interestingly, there are some out there who believe they actually found the lost city and simply lived out the rest of their lives there, while others speculate that they simply died of disease or starvation. However, either way, the truth is no one knows what happened to them, if they ever reached the lost city, or where their remains could be. In the years after Fawcett vanished, thousands of would-be adventurers mounted rescue missions, and as many as 100 people eventually died searching for them. So searches were eventually called off, and the mystery of what happened to Percy Fawcett remains to this day. Moving on to number 2, Roald Amundsen. The year was 1928 when celebrity explorer Roald Amundsen vanished into thin air and was never to be seen again. Roald had become a world-famous face after his 1911 expedition, where he successfully reached the South Pole, and from that point forward he was considered one of the greatest explorers to have ever lived. So imagine everyone's surprise when he went missing on a trip far less dangerous than any of his previous missions. The day was June 18th, 1928, and believe it or not, it was not his own mission he disappeared on, but on a rescue trip for an already missing person. Along with a crew of 5, Roald boarded the rescue flight and headed for the crew that had crashed while returning from the North Pole. But neither Roald, his crew, or his aircraft were ever seen again. Due to his popularity, a search for the team began nearly immediately, but after no evidence of a crash and no bodies were found, it was called off. Years later, in 2004 and 2009, the Norwegian Navy attempted to search for the wreckage of the mysterious disappearing aircraft, but they too never uncovered a single piece of evidence, and whatever happened to Roald Amundsen remains a mystery to this day. And last up in our number 1 spot, Masha. So we've talked about mysterious disappearances in the Paris catacombs, but they aren't the only catacombs in the world. And in fact, it's believed that an even scarier disappearance happened in the city of Odessa, Ukraine. On New Year's Eve in 2005, Masha and a group of friends went to visit the catacombs to explore. The group was young and looking for an adventure, but they had also been drinking, and so unfortunately did not have their wits about them. However, when they arrived, they all felt a bit too nervous to enter, so they sat near the entrance and continued to drink. At one point, Masha told the group that she had to pee, so she ventured a little deep into the tunnels for some privacy. A while later, the group was ready to go home, but as they had been drinking, they forgot Masha had left the group to go pee and assumed she'd gone home, so they left. However, Masha was still inside, but alone and disoriented, she continued to bury herself deeper and deeper in the mines until she had no idea how to escape. Fast forward 6 months, and a group of urban explorers were venturing into one of the most unexplored areas when they came across the body of a woman. Initially, it was thought to be Masha, but strangely, no one has ever been able to confirm for certain. So either Masha's remains are still a mystery, or what they found was another missing explorer.
Number 10. Wooden structures. Santa Fe National Forest in New Mexico has bizarre wooden structures all throughout the forest. No one knows who made them or why. The structures range in size, but have all been constructed out of fallen trees and limbs, with some reaching over 20 feet tall and dozens of diameter. They don't seem to have a pattern as to their locations, they simply appear. They do have a few things in common though. They resemble teepees, though no one can actually live inside them. Forage rangers will find anyone they catch making them, as they pose a fire risk, but they've never actually caught anyone. The Forest Service has no idea who's building them or why, but their response so far has been to dismantle any that are found. The destruction of these mystery structures is to eliminate the forest fire threat that they create. National Forest spokesperson Julie Ann Overton says whatever the structures are for, they are dangerous for the park and its visitors. They may have as many as 1,000 pieces of wood in them. The wood is seasoned and dry, and the design is similar to a classic kindling pyramid, but on a much larger scale. And to exacerbate the obvious fire danger, people appear to be using fire rings inside many of these structures. The Santa Fe National Park Service has issued a press release asking for any information about the mystery structures. According to the release, these structures are prohibited under federal law, and violators could face a fine up to $5,000 and possible imprisonment for up to 6 months. Now, does this have to do with a cult or Bigfoot? No one knows. Number 9. Bessie and Glenn Hyde. In 1928, Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were traveling down the Colorado River by boat in October and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was new at it. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance, who said they got the feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. It was said if they completed the trip successfully, they would go on a paid lecture tour. So the trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. Now there are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try a too difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent, or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports on what happened to the Hydes, and there have been more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. Number 8. Devil's Den. This name just sounds creepy. Devil's Den is a state park situated in Arkansas, but it's part of the larger Ozark National Park that surrounds it. Unexplained disappearances have been happening here for years, and in the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Vast Alst went missing while camping at the park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. The catch, she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She'd also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her. She wasn't even scared. No one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. Number 7. UFO sightings. Yosemite National Park in California has been the site of UFO reports for years. Visitors see strange lights and disc-shaped orbs hovering in the sky. Usually they disappear quickly, but people have managed to capture photos and videos to back up their claims. In 2002, several people in different sections of the park saw a lighted disc fly across the sky. It disappeared within minutes, only to be followed by Air Force jets, who circled the area a while, then left. As far as anyone knows, nothing was found, but the pictures and videos remain proof that it was there, whatever it might be. Number 6. Missing park ranger. On January 13th, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who was last seen heading out to do a trail check around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him. They first assumed that he had been the victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued and no trace was found, suspicions began to rise. One park volunteer came forward to say that he'd seen Paul in a truck with 2 strange men, leading some to wonder if he had been kidnapped. Or some proposed he may have simply ditched his old life. Whatever the truth, no trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. To make things even more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wildlands. The search and rescue teams found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger. Number 5. Bennington Triangle. Paula Weldon was a student at Vermont's Bennington College and was familiar with the Green Mountain National Forest to the east of her college town. According to the Bennington Banner, Paula set off for the trail on December 1st, 1946, telling her roommate, "I'm off for a long walk," and she was wearing relatively light clothing. She apparently hitchhiked to the trail with local Louis Knapp, who gave a ride to a young woman matching her description. He dropped her off near the trail, and the last known person to see her was a watchman named Ernie Whiteman, who warned her about going into the cold landscape. Once it became clear that Paula had gone into the forest but hadn't left, a search was organized, but it was to no avail. Paula was actually one of 6 people who were reported missing near Bennington from 1945 to 1950. Their still unsolved disappearances helped them earn the nickname of the Bennington Triangle for the area. Number 4. Mishandling of cases. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car. 40 minutes passed, and his mother realized that David never returned and that the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. He was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strangest disappearances in national parks. A week later, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. This area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by some someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead, without any reason or clue as to why. This is already baffling, especially considering the power of forensics and the skill of investigators, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to handle the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that being his fate. No one nearby heard David scream either. David's parents have gone on record to say they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar, they believe he was kidnapped, and that he still may be alive somewhere and that the body wasn't his. Some believe that authorities know more than what they're saying. Are they covering up something that we don't know about? What are they hiding from us? Number 3. The missing family. 7.5 months after the Coden family was reportedly missing in 1974, police found their bodies. The Codens had gone camping in the Siskiyou Mountains in Applegate, Oregon over Labor Day weekend in 1974, but failed to show up for dinner at Richard Cohen's mother's house on September 1st. Media accounts from the time described their campsite as undisturbed, as if the family left abruptly. Investigators had later assumed that they had been abducted. Their bodies were then discovered in April 1975, about 100 feet from the campsite. Richard's body was found tied to a tree, while the bodies of his wife, son, and daughter were found in a cave with rocks sealing the entrance. Dwayne Lee Little, a criminal serving 2 life sentences, allegedly confessed to a fellow inmate that he ended the life of the Codens while on parole. But there was no conviction, and the case remains open. Number 2. The Yucca Man. Few people can confidently tell you what exactly is the nature of being popularly known as the Yucca Man. Spotted around California's Joshua Tree National Park, Yucca Man has been variously interpreted as an unknown but real cryptid. Longreads notes that many reports of the Yucca Man began to arise in the 1970s when more and more people were settling the area with housing developments and exploring the park through hiking and camping. People report that the creature is often announced by its gut-wrenching body odor, while others have spotted its massive hulk amongst the brush or seen huge footprints in the soil. Many agree that it's covered in hair and often sports glowing red eyes. Even military personnel at nearby Edwards Air Force Base have encountered a very similar creature nicknamed Blue Eyes. Whatever the creature is, it sounds terrifying to me. And coming in at number 1 is cave systems. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. They headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Now Dennis and his brothers had planned a prank. They were going to hide separately in the bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare them. They did the prank, but then they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out to search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history. One of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing persons. Dwight was a seasoned tracker, and he was struck by the complete lack of any sort of tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Now, people's disappearances at national parks have prompted people to question how a map of missing persons in the US lines up with America's largest cave systems. Are these people disappearing and being taken to these caves by cave people, animals, or some sort of creature? The mystery still remains, but I think caves are the best place to look for our answers.